Good morning to everyone. Let me welcome you again to COP28 in Dubai and the rest of the world that's watching. Good morning from Dubai and COP28. My name is Junaid Ahmed. I'm the Vice President Operations for MIGA, which is the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. It's one of the institutions of the World Bank. We have a very exciting and I think a thought-provoking discussion today. And there's a particular emphasis that we want to take in today's conversation. Often when we talk about access to finance, we immediately think of private finance being leveraged into development. But in between, there are institutions that actually make that work. What are these institutions? And often we think of private banks and private institutions or at the global level, multilateral development finance institutions. But actually, MDBs, while they have a direct relationships with countries, really have an important partnership with a set of financial institutions that we're going to be talking about today. These are national level development finance institutions. They are sub-regional development finance institutions, sub-regional meaning clusters of country in a continent, and there could be sub-regional in the sense as within a country, a set of, if you will, provinces or regions that come together and form a development bank. These development banks, which are state development banks or sponsored by the state, become a very important intermediary in bringing global finance into development. And today we are very happy to and very proud to bring to you three very important institutions that the World Bank Group as a whole has a partnership with and who are going to play a fundamental role in this incredible climate transition that we are part of. So let me introduce to you the speakers today and the institutions that they come from. We have Richard Martinez, who's the Vice President of FinDeter from Colombia. Then we have Joao Kleinbing, who's the President CEO of BRDE, which is actually a development bank made up of provinces of Brazil, southern provinces, if I'm not wrong. And finally, Marina Dockweiler, who's the head of social and environment of Font Plata, which brings together several nations in Latin America. So they're all, if you will, based out of Latin America, fair enough, but I think this is going to be a very interesting set of issues and examples for the rest of the world. Let me begin with Richard, and I think Richard and Marina, you'll be speaking in Spanish, but we are equally enabled by someone who will bring Spanish to the rest of the world. Richard, let me begin by asking you, give us a very quick sense of FinDeter. What is FinDeter about?
Gracias. Buenos días. Muchas gracias, Unite, por esta invitación. Pasando a FinDeter, FinDeter es un banco de desarrollo nacional que tiene un campo de acción en las municipalidades y en los departamentos. Es un banco que tiene un esquema el cual incluye el apoyo a las regiones desde la estructuración de los proyectos hasta la ejecución de los mismos, pasando por su financiación.
So, FinDeter, is this working? Yeah. FinDeter is a national bank involved with municipalities and sub-departments in the municipalities, and we are helping the local authorities from the structuring to the implementing to the funding of the project.
En el desarrollo de esas actividades tenemos un equipo muy fuerte y robusto de ingenieros que se encargan de dar todo el apoyo técnico a las regiones en el desarrollo de sus proyectos. Y por el otro lado tenemos una parte financiera que es la que se encarga, como tú lo mencionaste, de canalizar esos recursos desde la banca multilateral, la banca comercial y los mercados de capitales.
So we have two pillars. We have the supporting pillar for technical issues and for financial issues. And the financial will be dealing with World Bank, Commercial Bank, and venture capital.
Okay, let me keep the conversation flowing. So we'll come back. We'll come back to you. Perhaps I can turn to Joao. BRD, can you just give us a quick synopsis of your institution?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. So the Southern Brazil Development Bank is a semi-national development bank. It was founded 62 years ago by the two southernmost states of the country. At the beginning, our mission is to provide private sector with long-term financing, and in recent years, we've been expanding our role to finance municipalities, local governments, especially in adaptation to climate change, in infrastructure, and providing them, as Findeter said, with technical assistance, especially for medium municipalities, the ones who cannot access international funds by themselves. And we, with the multilateral development banks and other national institutions, we can provide them with funds and with the technical assistance so they can invest in their municipalities.
So there's a very interesting part of the storyline. While what you're hearing is a description of development finance institutions that access capital markets to bring in money for development, both of them actually then move on to subnational municipal financing. So that's the chain of partnership that is, I think, very important, from markets to development finance institutions to subnational governments. Findeter is a national entity, whereas BRD is a subnational entity. So let me now turn to asking Marina about Fontplata, because you are not a subnational, but please.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation for discussing this relevant topic with our partners and share our experience as well. Fontplata is a regional development country bank, which is composed by 5 countries: Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia. Those 5 countries constitute the El Plata River Basin, which is the second largest one, after the Amazonian one. So, nosotros trabajamos, al igual que ellos también, a nivel subnacional, particularmente en el Brasil, con gobiernos locales y también a nivel central con entidades del gobierno central, financiando proyectos a través de créditos.
So we are, like my colleague to my right, we are also subnational, and in particular, we, Brazil, we are cooperating with governmental and local central authorities, and we do this through the basis of credits.
Thank you. So we at the World Bank Group are very proud to say that we are partners with these institutions. Traditionally, one looks at the World Bank as a lending entity, and we would provide lines of credit to development finance institution. MIGA, which is the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, we don't provide direct lending. What we do is we act as a leveraging entity. In other words, we will de-risk private market finance into the hands of development finance institutions for them to on-lend and work with municipalities and others. This is the important structure of finance, which I think the world must not forget, because it'll be very valuable in achieving what my president, Ajay Banga, has promised, which is the shift of the World Bank to be putting close to 50% of its financing into climate and nature. And it can only do so in partnership with institutions like this. So let me go to a little bit more into this issue of your role in climate finance. And we'll begin with you, Richard. Where is Findeter today in terms of supporting the climate transition in development?
Okay. Findeter como Banco de Desarrollo apoya la transición justa energética que viene desarrollando la política nacional. Nosotros en ese sentido estamos financiando todos los proyectos que tienen generación eléctrica a partir de fuentes no convencionales. Ahí estamos financiando nosotros proyectos de generación a través de energía solar, proyectos eólicos y pequeñas centrales hidroeléctricas.
So we, in terms of a bank who is sustaining just climate transition, we are supporting all projects at national level that deal with electricity generating, but not only through traditional electricity means, but also through solar and wind parks.
Por el otro lado, estamos también apoyando al sector transporte, muy importante en las municipalidades, apoyando proyectos de transporte masivo, Ahí estamos vinculando estos sistemas de transporte masivo a temas como movilidad eléctrica, movilidad intermodal. Estamos apoyando la generación de cicloinfraestructura, de la misma forma en que también estamos apoyando el desarrollo de cables aéreos como un nuevo medio de transporte en aquellas zonas periféricas de las grandes ciudades.
So not only are we cooperating in electricity projects, but we're also cooperating in a very important sector, which is the mass municipal transportation. And in this regard, we are aiming and covering electrical mobility, intermodal transportation, covering the whole cycle, even providing cable cars in those remote areas.
Can I ask you, could you give us a sense what percentage of your loans would be in this area of energy transition, transport transition, around climate?
Bueno, nosotros estamos apenas arrancando el tema de la transición. Los porcentajes de la cartera hoy en día son bajos, pero tenemos una expectativa con base en un programa que venimos adelantando, en una dirección de sostenibilidad que hemos creado para poder definir una cartera carbono neutral hacia los aproximadamente próximos 15 años.
So we're still low because we just started, but we are very ambitious and we want to become neutral carbon in the next 20 years in support of sustainability. So as far as transport, we're still low in that percentage.
I'll come back to you a little bit about the future challenges, but maybe I can turn to BRD and ask you, where are you in your approach to climate finance?
Yeah, as I said, we start as a private money provider, long-term private money provider, and now we are moving to climate. We are moving especially to decarbonize our credit portfolio. And as for now, 80% of our credit operations are related, adhere to at least one of the SDGs, and we have a very strong presence in the agribusiness in southern Brazil. 37% of our credit portfolio comes from agriculture, but they represent 50% of our financed emissions. So we are working closely with them in order to decarbonize the whole agribusiness chain, for example, working with the state of Santa Catarina in a project that will reforestate like 380,000 small farmers like an average size like 15 hectares. So it's the largest one of these kind of projects in Brazil. We are also working together with the big meat producers in the country. Santa Catarina, for example, the state where I come from, we're a very small state. We represent just 1% of the Brazilian territory, but we represent 28% of the pork meat produced in the country. And so we are working with the meat producers and with companies and with the Industrial Federation to finance small biodigester in the farmers so we can decarbonize and reduce the methane emissions related to pork meat producing, for example. And of course, with municipalities, we have a partnership with the World Bank on finance climate adaptation for cities in recent weeks. The three states, we've been hit by floods, by severe floods in the Itajaí Valley, in the Taquari Valley. So we are working in nature-based solutions and how we can not just build back, but build back better, using the term. So we can use nature-based solutions to adapt cities to these recurring flooding events, for example. But I think our key goal is to work on a plan up to 2050 to decarbonize, to become neutral in terms of carbon in our finance emissions, in our portfolio.
But it's important, something very important that you mentioned. I mean, Findeter and both of you are talking about decarbonization and obviously the mitigation side of the world. But your focus on agriculture and your focus on flood management brings adaptations to the story.
Yes.
Is your bank equally focused on adaptation as an objective?
Yes, we are, especially the municipalities, we are increasing our position on adaptation, especially for floods, for rising temperatures, and to housing. We have a very hilly territory. So, like informal settlements, we are providing municipalities not just with the money but with technical assistance and with different projects, so they can build housings that relocate people from flood-prone areas to more safer areas, relocate people from landslide-prone areas to more safer areas, and with drainage system and sewage systems, so they can have a better adapted city to the new rainy pattern of the future.
I have to admit my question on adaptation is a very biased one. I'm a Bangladeshi. We have contributed very little to the world's problem of climate, but we are recipients of every other impact. So adaptation is very important to us. So I never fail to remind my colleagues or other colleagues that adaptation is an equally important, if not as important, a storyline. Let's move to Fonplata. Where is Fonplata today in the whole debate about climate and development?
Bueno, nosotros en Fonplata trabajamos tanto con el nivel central de gobierno como los gobiernos locales.
Sorry, I was waiting for a longer sentence. We at Fonplata, we cooperate with central governments and local governments at same level of cooperation.
En el caso de los gobiernos locales, trabajamos con gobiernos locales de pequeño y mediano porte, donde no llegan otras agencias de desarrollo.
So in the case of local government, we're working with small and middle size, but they don't have the possibility to get to development funds.
Trabajamos tanto en mitigación como en adaptación. En mitigación, lo que estamos haciendo ahora es tratar de inducir la inclusión de componentes en la infraestructura que tengan un alto grado de mitigación. Por ejemplo,
So in mitigation and adaptation, what we're doing is, particularly on the mitigation side, when we include components to make sure that they have a high degree of contribution to mitigation.
por ejemplo, en programas de desarrollo urbano, trabajamos con el cambio hacia tecnologías LED de iluminación, también en el apoyo a incluir dentro de las vías urbanas todo lo que son las ciclovías, ¿no? Transporte más limpio. Obviamente también viendo el tamaño de nuestros gobiernos locales. Y en el caso de gobiernos centrales, lo que hacemos es trabajar con las agencias de prestadoras de los servicios de energía. Hemos estado trabajando con la agencia en Paraguay, por ejemplo, para financiar parte de su línea de transmisión bajo un enfoque de reducción de pérdidas.
So for the local governments, we, in terms of of urban development, we are working on technologies like the LED for electricity. Also, we are promoting the use of bicycle lane, and this is for the small-sized local governments. Now, when it comes to central governments, we approach the energy agencies, and we're doing, like in the case of Paraguay, we are helping with the finance of a line of transmission. That's what we're doing with Paraguay.
With a focus on reducing losses, ¿no? in the whole network. Y también algo que es muy importante para nosotros es que nosotros trabajamos en adaptación. Nuestra mayor demanda de nuestro portafolio es en proyectos de adaptación. No puede ser de otra manera porque la región es muy vulnerable a los efectos de cambio climático.
So we basically work a lot on demand, on adaptation. That's what we have the highest demand, because the region is very vulnerable and very much suffering from the climate change, so they need to adapt.
And in adaptation, our approach is to promote a new vision of infrastructure conceptualization in a form that it is not looked like apart from territorial planning. No? So our focus is also in giving capacity to local governments, not to the technical staff only, but also to the personnel that is responsible for the territorial planning, because it is very important that the authorities are aware also of the opportunities and the risk that the climate change brings to them, and try to include them into the planning tools.
So let me ask this question to our other colleagues. In FinDeter, how much are you seeing state capability as a challenge to deal with climate and development? I mean, we assume that everyone agrees that climate and development are no longer separable. Are we seeing growth in capacity, state capability to address it? And what role do you play in promoting that?
Buenísima pregunta. Y en línea con lo que comentabas del tema de Bangladesh, Colombia se afecta por el fenómeno del niño y de la niña cada cierto periodo de tiempo. Luego, el tema de adaptación para nosotros es también muy importante y cobra relevancia aquello que hoy se denomina soluciones basadas en la naturaleza.
So for us in Colombia, we are very much impacted by the two weather phenomenon, as you all know, El Niño and La Niña. So we need to adapt to this phenomenon, and for that we do believe in what you just mentioned, the nature-based solutions.
Ya respondiendo a tu pregunta, a nivel de municipalidades, reconocen la necesidad de poder, digamos, tener soluciones que vengan relacionadas con el tema del cambio climático, de la adaptación y la mitigación. Sin embargo, las capacidades no son hoy en día las que se requieren para poder avanzar de una manera importante en el cumplimiento de las metas de objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, por ejemplo.
So the municipal authorities and the state authorities, likewise, they acknowledge the relevance of endowing themselves of the necessary measures for mitigation and adaptation, and yet they are lacking the capacity, unfortunately, to adapt to the Sustainable Development Goal, to the SDGs.
Ahí es donde FinDeter cobra una relevancia importante, porque, como lo mencioné, a través de la asistencia técnica, nosotros nos arremangamos la camisa y vamos a las autoridades locales a tratar de desarrollar ese tipo de capacidades y poder colaborar para que podamos canalizar la mayor cantidad de recursos en la solución de estos problemas, en proyectos que solucionen estos problemas.
And this is why I said we at the bank, we roll our sleeves up and put our hands at work in terms of providing the technical assistance that the municipal don't have.
Let me ask you at the BRD level, how are you seeing this issue of the rise of state capability to address this nexus between climate and development?
I think this is key for us. We are putting now in all our agreements with municipalities a very strong and increasing institutional capacity building component in all our agreements. There are cities like Blumenau, for example, the city that has served as mayor in the past, which has a very strong capability because it has been dealing with floods for the last 100 years or so. But of course, with the climate change, yes, my colleague said, with this extreme El Niño that we are dealing with right now in South America, several cities that were not historically hit by floods. Now they have to deal with that, and they do not have the capability to do so. So besides providing them with finance to rebuild or to adapt, we are also helping them on developing a civil defense department, on providing them with the technology to become more aware of what's going over the future, or like to prevent and plan for future events. As we see that in the future, these kind of events are going to be much more common, unfortunately. So we are working with them and providing them with not just money for the built environment, but also to build this capability in the municipalities.
So let me shift the conversation away from state capability and state delivery to where we stand in MIGA. MIGA, as I mentioned, we're an entity that tries to leverage private finance into development. For every $1 that we guarantee, we bring in $16 of private finance. It's a leverage of 1:16, which is the highest of any multilateral development institution. What is even more powerful is for every dollar that we guarantee, 65 cents we reinsure in the market. So it's both ways that we bring in private finance, both direct leveraging as well as reinsuring. What is not known is that we were capitalized with $366 million in 1988, and we've never had any more money given to us since then. That 366 has been mobilized into $75 billion of guarantees of private finance. It's why my president Ajay Banga says that MIGA is his secret weapon. The problem is it's too secret, right? And these numbers are not known, and this partnership that we're evolving is not fully understood. But let me ask you, how has private finance responded to your efforts to do development and climate in the way that you do it? A very quick answer from you, please. Where is private finance in your story, and how responsive has it been? Maybe we'll start with you.
I think we lack this kind of, we now see ourselves like a mobilized entity to bring private finance to climate or to development in our region. For example, the project with the reforestation project that I was talking about, we need to mobilize private finance for that. And I think that's our challenge in the future. We are, of course, looking to different ways of doing it with carbon markets, with some grant money from several partners. But we need to understand how we can bring private money to this conversation, because it would be impossible just with our leverage capacity to address all this issue.
Fair enough. Fonplata, where is it with private finance?
Well, Fonplata ahora trabaja solo con créditos soberanos, con garantía soberana al sector público. Sin embargo, nosotros estamos construyendo ahora una línea de financiamiento para créditos no soberanos dirigidos al sector público y a los otros bancos nacionales de desarrollo.
Well, Fonplata, we normally work with sovereign credit, but we're now creating a facility which will be non-sovereign and will be addressed to the public sector.
Y ahora creo que también el tema de la construcción de capacidades no es solamente dirigida al tema de al sector público, sino también al sector privado, porque necesitamos del trabajo de todos. Entonces, el tema de construir capacidades es muy importante para nosotros también, para poder trabajar junto con ellos, no solo en el otorgamiento de créditos, sino también en todo el proceso del ciclo de proyecto, ¿no? Desde las licitaciones, de poder tener compras sostenibles, en los equipamientos que se financian o la infraestructura que se financia, y también en poder impulsar temas de tecnología e innovación en nuestros proyectos que sean más limpias y sostenibles.
So in terms of capacity building, we are trying to foster capacity building both on the public and on the private side, and we're doing so through granting credits and accompanying the process, the whole cycle, from the very moment of the tender, to make sure that there is also like sustainable procurement for the equipment.
Question to Findeter. Where is private finance in your storyline?
Unai, para nosotros la financiación privada es muy importante. Nosotros, como usted lo menciona, tenemos ya 2 créditos garantizados por MIGA, y aquí quisiera mencionar una anécdota.
Well, for us, private is very important, and we have already 2 credits that are guaranteed by MIGA, and I'd like to tell you a little story in that regard.
Hace pocos días me reuní con un banco de Nueva York, y gracias, digamos, a esa confianza que se ha venido generando, nos dice: nosotros hacemos lo que hoy en día no hacen los bancos, prestamos plata. Y es básicamente ese proceso que nosotros hemos venido adelantando con entidades como MIGA, la que empiezan a poder darle a entidades como nosotros acceso a recursos del sector privado.
So the story goes, I got in a meeting with the Neurobank, And they said, well, because there's so much trust in the MIGA project, then this is why you guys are doing what is precisely what banks should do, which is loan money. And this is why the MIGA trust and the MIGA support is so important in us procuring these facilities for the local authorities.
Trust me, I didn't set that question up. But I think it actually reflects a very important point. We started this conversation saying that there's an architecture of state-owned enterprises, financial enterprises, that links private finance into development. And you heard from each of our colleagues about that structure that leads all the way into subnational, into municipalities, where really the climate transition has to be dealt with. But what we then turn to is say, where is private finance today? Because to address the challenge of climate and development, pure public sector development finance is not going to be sufficient. Unless this architecture of development finance is linked to private finance, we are not going to be able to really finance the climate transition that's needed. And that's a challenge for us at the World Bank too. How do we go from being a lending institution to being a leveraging institution that can partner with the ones that can lend to the actual local partners on the ground? I think this is a very big challenge that is facing the World Bank Group in partnership with the Development Finance Institution. But maybe what I'll do is I'll ask a colleague of mine from MIGA, Chris, who is the Sector Manager of Financial Operation. Chris, very briefly, from your experience, is this storyline of MIGA working with the development finance institutions, are we on the right track in trying to bring private capital into development finance?
Thank you, Junaid. I hope so. What MIGA does is we provide the link between the private capital markets and the funding to the development banks. And the development banks are very important to us because they are policy institutions implementing the climate policies and the NDCs of their shareholders and of their countries. So we work very closely with the development banks and the regional development banks and engage with them to think about what are the climate projects that need to be financed, that you need to be financed. And how can we help? How can we support that? How can you gain financing at an affordable rate? And once we reach an agreement, that on lending that you do to municipalities that's really on the ground, we at MIGA, we can't achieve that ourselves. We can only achieve that through you. And so that's why these partnerships are really important to us.
No, thank you. I think this is clearly, well, let me reflect. Partnership has always been an important part of the development dialogue, but I think we recognize that if we are to capture the private finance, this partnership between the DFIs that you represent, the multilateral system that the World Bank represents, has to work as a leveraging entity. And if it doesn't work as a leveraging entity, we're not going to be able to bring in the type of finance that we need. Let me ask each of you, if you were to say, what is the one challenge you face today in this story of dealing with climate transition, what would it be from your perspective? Let's start with Findeter.
Bueno, yo creo que uno de los retos más importantes es toda la implementación de la medición de impacto que debemos llevar a cabo para poder acceder a mayores fuentes. Y el segundo reto muy importante es que aquí, como estamos vinculando al sector privado, es mejorar todos los temas relacionados con ESG.
Well, I'd say that I could mention two. The number one is the implementing of measures of the impact of our actions, number one. And number two, for the private, to improve everything related to ESG.
From Juan Plata's perspective.
Creo que uno de los principales desafíos que confrontamos es el tema de la falta de información y datos para que sirvan de base para las métricas, para la métrica de resultados, ¿no? También es el tema de construcción de capacidades en los gobiernos locales. Creo que uno de los desafíos para las agencias de financiamiento es también impulsar el financiamiento de los proyectos, del diseño de los proyectos, para que estos sean de mejor calidad a través de recursos no reembolsables, ¿no? Y en el día a día es el trabajar con los organismos ejecutores, el día a día, todos los procesos por la, digamos, la dificultad que estos, al ser nuevos, al ser novedosos, toda la dificultad que estos representan, sobre todo para gobiernos locales que tienen limitadas capacidades.
So I've mentioned three things. The lack of training in terms of how we measure the outcome of our action. Number two, in terms of capacity building for the financing agency. We need to be able to be involved in the design of the project to make sure that we have better outcome with non-reimbursable means. And number three, the day-to-day operations to make sure that we improve the capacity in the local authorities.
And from our perspective, I think, as both of them said, I think how we measure the outcomes, we are now working on that as well with our state owners, on developing a kind of a framework on how we're going to measure the actual outcomes of our actions in terms of social and environmental outcomes, and of course with municipalities raise awareness on their priorities based on the outcomes that they want to achieve. I think building this capacity at municipal level and inside our institution as well to address and to work closely with the municipality, I think, are the two main challenges for the future.
You know, in this storyline, for MIGA, I feel that it is an issue of how much risk can an MDB system take? And my sense is that the shareholders of MDBs, and certainly the shareholders of MIGA, have got to put forward a storyline that we have to be risk takers. The world requires a fundamental shift in the way development is done. And if we are to do that development, not only is this partnership has to work, but it has to work by us taking more risk. And I think the ability to leverage, de-risk, is the big story. To deal with what President Ajebanga says, the political risks, that's a huge risk that we should be able to absorb so that this partnership can move forward. I think for me, the conversation today has been a very positive and powerful one because it's laid out a structure. It's laid out a structure that exists, the one that begins with MDBs in partnership with DFIs at national, at subnational, and across regions. That this is a public sector, international public sector partnership, which, if it can leverage private capital, can deliver finance at the local level, at municipal level, where the real battle of change in climate finance is going to happen. Whether we do transition at the transport level, whether we do it at the agriculture level, whether we do it at the energy level, the ability for us to bring municipalities and subnationals in this partnership becomes very important. So I conclude today by first thanking all of you and certainly thanking our simultaneous translator, without whose support this would not have worked. I think we must leave with the optimism that there is private finance, but this private finance has to be cajoled to bring in. And I think what you are seeing here is a potential architecture of public sector DFI partnership that can bring in that private finance to really help in the transition that we are facing today, which is about development and climate. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.